selection of name brands that you trust for quality and flavor. Then there's Woodward's own brands. They're made up to a quality, not down to a price, but great value. And when economy is the most important buying decision, there's unbranded products, low-priced every day. Remember, for a great choice and good, honest value.
Woodward's has it all. SCTV, we're coming through for you.
Good morning. British Columbia's social credit government has laboured in almost total silence for the past 9 months while we're going through our winter of extreme discontent. 228,000 unemployed and a bleak economic future. And after all its labour, the government has produced an offspring, which carries with it gifts in the form of more money for MLAs in the House. We're going to have a little review this morning, member by member, of what is happening in the final sittings of the old session, what may happen in the new session. And we have a cast of characters who are bright, breezy, and I think in the main very responsive. They include Don Phillips, Austin Pelton, Bob Williams, Frank Howard, Graham Lea. But first off the top this morning, the man who promised a new sweet reason, if possible, in the legislature, the Honourable Bob Skelly, the new leader of the NDP after the break. Good morning to Bob Skelly, new leader of the NDP, and a simple question, Mr. Skelly, if it's possible to answer it. Under your tutelage, will the NDP accept, with grace and favour, the expense allowances to be given to all of the members of the legislature in these specific amounts as outlined apparently in these new propositions of the government?
Well, these aren't government propositions, Jack. They're a report of a select standing committee of the legislature. So at the moment, they're simply recommendations to the House. I suppose what we're going to have to wait and see is what actually does come down in legislation and in changes to the rules before we make that decision.
But in fact, it's going to be, what, 3,000, speaking broadly about the backbenchers, if there are any left on the other side, and you certainly have lots, it means about, what, $3,000, generally speaking, in increased expenses, as recommended by the Select Parliamentary Standing Committee.
Yes, I don't know the detailed figures. I haven't had a chance to look at the report yet, but there is an increase for living expenses in Victoria and an increase for travel expenses in the constituency. As I understand it, there are no increases in salaries, simply an increase in those expenses.
And I believe an increase for your whip and an increase for your House Leader.
There is now a provision, at least in the recommendations, for a paid whip's position and a paid House Leader, yes.
In this time of restraint, when so many people are undoubtedly suffering, do you think it'll be proper for you, as you have indicated, to vote to accept these increases?
Well, of course, as you know, we've opposed the so-called restraint program that the government has imposed on this province. We think it has done tremendous economic damage, and I feel if we can get MLAs back to work to change the worst provisions of that restraint program, then it's going to be worth it to the people of British Columbia. And I made proposals yesterday to do that very thing, to get committees working around the province to develop a new economic plan for this province, and to put MLAs back to work and have them earning their money, changing the economic patterns in this province.
I don't want to nag you on this, but you're in agreement in the all-party committee that more money is needed if MLAs are going to do their jobs properly?
Yes, we've agreed, our committee members have agreed to those expense recommendations.
Good. Now, what about the other major expense, an addition of 12 new members to the House? I thought Darrell Warren's report had only recommended 7, but 12. How do you feel about that? That's another $1 million a year or something for 12 more MLAs after the next election.
Well, again, if it if it's an increase in 12 social credit MLAs, we feel it could do tremendous economic damage beyond the basic cost of the of providing for those new MLAs.
Well, the fact... Sorry.
We feel that membership should be on the basis of one member per constituency, and we feel that this current report simply accentuates the problems of the Eckhart gerrymander of a few years ago. So we're not very pleased with that.
Are you saying that this proposition to make 2-seat ridings in 12 more constituencies, of which only one is currently held by the NDP and Nanaimo, is an extension of gerrymandering?
Well, it follows precisely the same boundaries as the Eckhart gerrymander of 1978, and we feel that it simply accentuates the problems and the bias towards social credit in that Eckhart gerrymander.
And I don't suppose it takes any steps to wipe out the controversial Gracie's finger.
As far as I'm aware, it doesn't take any steps in that direction at all. It's simply a formula report. If a riding reaches a certain population, then they're entitled, based on this formula, to a second member or to a division into a 3-member riding within the original Eckhart gerrymander boundaries.
I see.
That's our concern.
Now, what about your plan? You were talking about a mood of reasonableness, cooperation, and Bennett seems to have responded. Do you have hopes that we shall see the end of the kind of kindergarten comics we've suffered in the BC legislature for some years?
Well, I think so. I'm quite pleased that Bennett has responded to my initiative on this, and hopefully we'll be able to set the tone for debate in the legislature through the coming session. I also proposed yesterday a system of activating a special select standing committee to travel around the province to develop, again, an economic strategy for recovering from the worst effects of this restraint program.
You mean to go into various communities and say, tell me what you would want done to revive industry?
And in fact, many of those communities, mayors, groups within the community, trade unions, have developed proposals, but unfortunately there's no process to get those proposals to government so that we do come up with an economic strategy. This is a proposal that's not new in British Columbia. It was tried back in the 1940s. W.A.C. Bennett served on that committee with Gretchen Steeves and other representatives from the NDP, and they developed a blueprint that was used during the 50s, 60s, and 70s for the economic development of this province.
Matter of fact, old-timers will remember that that was the blueprint which laid out the highway system which Bennett implemented in the early 50s.
And the hydroelectric system and a number of the agricultural plans for the province, reforestation proposals. All of these things were brought together by an all-party committee consulting with people around the province.
And you think there's time for that again right now? A brand new look without being bound to political ideologies?
Absolutely. We found that the restraint program was an idea hatched by one man in a consultation with the Fraser Institute, and that's the reason why it failed. Other countries, other provinces have been able to achieve restraint through cooperation and consultation and through a broader approach to the problems that the public is experiencing. I think a recovery program that's hatched by one man in consultation with an institute with a certain ideological point of view won't work either. What we have to do is to extend the process of consultation with the people of BC.
How much damage has this Fraser-Bennett coalition done to BC as far as you hear from ordinary people?
Well, you've outlined some of it to start with 250,000 people out of work in this province, 250,000 people on welfare or unemployment insurance, people who have lost in the space of the last 2 years all of the assets they've accumulated during their working lives. Many people in this province have suffered severe damage from which they will not be able to recover during their lifetimes unless the government takes action along the lines that I've recommended.
Now, surely though, as a member of the NDP, a guy with a firm philosophical socialist platform, you could tell me now, if you were in power, what you would do to get the economy going again. What would you do apart from reforestation, apart from public works? Or is Bennett in the same bind as, are you in the same bind as Bennett would be in because our world markets have collapsed?
No, as I pointed out, other provinces, other countries have recovered. Australia, for example, has set a goal of creating 500,000 new jobs within the space of 4 or 5 years. They've now achieved 400,000 new jobs. Manitoba, 29,000 new jobs as a result of their programs. So there are areas of the world that we can look at that have been able to weather the worst effects of this recession and are now, in the case of Manitoba, one of the fastest growing economies in Canada. In the case of Australia, one of the fastest growing countries, if not the fastest, in the industrialized countries. So there are countries that have successfully weathered the recession and accomplished restraint in cutting deficits at the same time. So I'm saying we have these examples of countries that have succeeded. We should take a look at the process that they've used and follow that process. There's nothing like success.
In other words, you've got no specific socialist platforms like nationalizing anything, which you would do were you to take power. I'm not trying to push you, I'm merely trying to get a flavor of Skelly. If Skelly is going to be the total moderate, cooperation, and forget the kind of NDP ideology to get things going.
Well, I think simply transferring ownership from private owners to government owners doesn't create any more jobs. We've already seen that. Transferring owners from one corporate owner to another corporate owner hasn't created many jobs either. I think that what's needed is a broader approach. Reforestation has to be part of it,
Right.
Public works has to be part of it, energy efficiency has to be part of it. No one program can solve the problem.
I think I got the message. May I finish on one short, simple question? In the legislature this year, will you do all you can to fight against the logging of Mears Island?
I'm opposed to the logging of Mears Island. I'll present a resolution expressing our opposition to Mears Island, but I would also like to see the loggers who will be displaced from Mears Island working. What's needed there is, again, an impartial resource allocation process where people are able to put in their information and have their day in court.
Fair enough. At the back of your hand to Jack Monroe in the meantime.
No, that's not true at all. I'm trying to find a way where Mears Island can be saved from logging and Jack Monroe's members can be put to work as well, and I think there is a solution, provided people back off from their hardened positions on this issue.
Everybody will be watching with keen interest the performance of Bob Skelly in his first full session leading the NDP with its 22 members. And I'll be back with Austin. Thank you, Mr. Skelly. I'll be back with Austin Pelton, Chairman of the Standing Committee on this, that, and the next thing, who brought in all these rules, recommendations after the break. And good morning to Austin Pelton, the MLA for Chmn, who is Chairman of the Select Committee on Standing Orders and Private Bills. Well, you're a little bit better off if these regulations go through, are you not, Mr. Pelton?
In respect to the private orders, the standing orders, Jack?
Yes.
Yes, we are. As a matter of fact, I'm very pleased that you asked about that, about what the committee did in that regard, because in my opinion, it's the most significant part of the work we did.
Very good for the MLAs anyway, isn't it?
Well, no, we're talking about, I'm talking about the standing orders, and I think...
Oh, I was talking about the money. You know what money
Oh,
grabbers...
money. Oh, I know about money.
You know,
yeah,
most people in under social credit in BC are out of work, so
Yeah.
therefore we're keen to know what extra money you're getting.
What I'm getting.
Everybody.
What everybody's getting. Well, I guess the most significant thing of all in the money thing was the business about providing for a cost of living for MLAs when they come into Victoria.
Perhaps we could take it and you could just tell me without me interrupting you what the increases, and I'm sure they're going to be passed by the NDP because it was an all-party committee, what the increases are going to be and how much they will be getting in the future as we look at our unemployment checks.
All right. Well, the cost of living, the capital city allowance, as we've chosen to call it, will provide for the payment to MLAs who live outside of the capital area with a daily compensation of $60 for up to 50 sitting days of the legislature in any given session.
That's $3,000 a year tax-free.
Not necessarily tax-free, Jack. In order for it to be tax-free, there has to be, in my understanding, approval obtained from the Revenue Department in Ottawa before that can take place.
But you'll try to get that.
Well, I wouldn't, that really is not something I could comment on, Jack, because the only thing that my committee has done is make recommendations to the government, and they will have to bring down legislation, I should say recommendations to the legislature, and they will have to bring down the necessary legislation, and it's, in my opinion, this is where that we would deal with this matter of tax-free or otherwise.
So an MLA presently gets about 40,000, including 13,000 in expenses, and he'll be picking up an extra 3,000 unless he's a member from the capital regional area.
That's right, Jack.
So that's up from 40 to 43,000.
That's right, Jack.
Now, the next one that just fascinates me is your recommendation for some kind of parliamentary secretary.
Parliamentary secretaries. I'm sure you're aware, Jack, that it certainly isn't unique in governments and parliaments across the country. We've recommended that there could be up to a maximum of 10. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are going to be 10 right off the bat, or even that there's going to be one.
Well, there could be 10.
Or there could be 10. That could be the maximum. And these people would serve with cabinet ministers in trying to take off some of the load, which, in my opinion, is heavy.
That's gophers. Eh? How much would they get?
$6,000 a year, Jack.
So therefore we've got 10 more social credit MLAs in this instance who could be getting 40 plus 3 plus 6. That would be 49,000 a year.
Yes.
By the way, and I can't include you in this remark, but that surely means that there will only be, if you take away all the cabinet ministers, the speaker, the deputy speaker, and the whip, that only leaves 12 people among whom these 10 jobs can be distributed.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
So all but 2 social credit members will get the extra 6,000 lolly.
That's possible,
And
Jack,
I'll tell you this,
but it's not necessarily so.
I'll tell you who won't get it, and you don't have to respond. My bet's 3 people: Kemp, Davis, and maybe Reynolds. But that's up to the cabinet.
That's right.
Now that's interesting, though. Anyway, very good indeed. And I do believe you give the opposition some additional allowances apart from that. Have you increased the money to the opposition whip
Yes, we have.
and to the opposition house leader?
Yes, they will get, as I recall, they will get an additional $3,000 per year.
And then remote allowances for the upcountry boys, and a flat $824.
Yeah, that represents everybody gets the in-constituency allowance, Jack, and that represents for those people who live in large areas where they cover great distances an increase. It's an increase of 50% on what they were getting before.
Good.
So
Well,
they're getting $2,400 as opposed to 16. This is what we've recommended, of course.
now, how about the rules? Will we be allowed back into the corridor to take pictures of any opposition leader who is dragged out bodily from the House? We were banned last year by that fellow Davidson in what I regarded as an abominable stricture on the free press.
Well, the rules, we didn't deal with that issue in the rules. As a matter of fact, I've got to know the rules fairly well, Jack, and I don't recall at this particular point in time that is even in there. But we've recommended over 100 changes to the rules.
Any major ones?
Well, some of them I think are very important.
Which I would understand. That's
Well,
all.
yes, I'm sure you would. I'm sure you'd understand them all, Jack. But the one that I am pleased with is that we've provided, if the recommendation is accepted, for a private members' hour, 1 day a week. It would be on a Friday. And the idea behind this would be that the private member, the little guy who unless he's participating in regular debate, doesn't really get the opportunity to say a great deal, would be able to stand on his feet and discuss almost anything, particularly, you know, items that were important to him and to his constituents. We would try and compress 4 of these into each hour. In other words, there'd be a total of 15 minutes discussion on any one item. It would be, we've recommended that it happen on a Friday, morning. And to try and keep the whole thing fair, we've asked that, or we've suggested, I suppose I should say, that if our recommendation is accepted, that people who wanted to speak would submit the topic which they wanted to discuss to the Speaker's office on the Tuesday of the same week. And if there were a great number of people that wanted to speak, then there would be lots drawn to see who would take up the 4 spots in any
That sounds
Friday.
good. Give them lots of coverage for the local papers. Now, what about can I still, under the new rules, challenge this ruling of the Speaker?
No, that
Oh.
that is one that we've recommended be dropped.
Do you get all-party agreement on that?
Yes, all of these recommendations were unanimous.
So that means
Jack.
there can't be any more scenes like Barrett being thrown out for refusing to... Oh, what's...
No, that can still happen. As a matter of fact, we did a lot of work on the sections that were involved in that particular
Does
case.
it mean they can no longer overturn the ruling of the Speaker?
What it means is if the Speaker makes a ruling, yes, that he is not challengeable.
What would you do if he was patently, blatantly wrong?
Well, you know, these things don't. I don't think these things happen. They aren't, and there are other avenues that can be taken if this happens. But Jack, I've learned more about the rules and about what goes on in parliaments around the world over the last 9 months than I ever knew before.
Have you been traveling around?
No, but just from the research that we've done and from the conversations we've had in our meetings.
Oh, well, let that develop. What about TV coverage? You know, I was criticized last year by certain people in the government because we showed pictures of cabinet ministers with the little teddy bears in their arms, and we were taking pictures through windows. And we were doing our best to embarrass them because the public was embarrassed by the legislature. Are you going to let us into the legislature so that you will all stay awake when the cameras are there?
Well, you put things so nicely, Jack.
But practically.
We feel that we've come forward with a relatively positive recommendation with regard to television and radio broadcasting out of the House, and we have, but we considered that, and I'm not trying to stall, and the committee isn't trying to stall. We didn't have enough time to complete the job we had to do on television.
So you have no recommendation for TV in the House yet?
Yeah. Well, we've recommended that the committee continue to look at this thing, and I would hope that it's an ongoing thing, that there'd be no break in the process, because we had a lot of submissions from people in the media like yourself, and we would like to talk to these people. We never had the opportunity.
Well, I'll give you my submission now. If you put live television to the House, I guarantee that speeches will be shorter. No members will ever be accused of falling asleep with their cuddly bears in their arms, and the behavior will become grown up all of a sudden.
Well, we've already, one of the recommendations we've made will shorten debate, so you'll be pleased to hear that one.
Limit, yes please. What limits on debate?
Well, we've shortened the debate by 10 minutes for ordinary members who stand and speak. It used to be they had 40 minutes to speak on a bill at any particular time, and we've shortened that to 30.
How about the budget? Is it not a dime without debate?
Oh, the budget will still be debated in the regular way.
Unlimited debate on the budget?
Well, there's a time limit on the budget, you know, it's the same as there is on the throne speech.
But you've got all-party agreement on all these changes?
We have, Jack.
Well, best of luck. I hope you enjoy your new expense allowance, and I hope you get one of the $6,000 posts.
Well,
that's almost a cert, because you wrote the report.
Thanks very much, Jack, and it's a pleasure to be on with you.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Pelton.
See you again.
See you again. Next, I'm going to speak to Don Phillips, and I'm not going to call him Old Leatherlungs, but after the break, he'll be here. Don Phillips is Minister of Industry and a man of many words. Right, Don?
Well, that depends on whose opinion you're taking, Jack.
Well, that's not even an opinion. You're a man who talks a lot, right?
Sometimes.
What are you going to do with your extra $3,000 bonus you didn't expect?
I'm going to try and make up what I've lost in the last 10 years since we've taken 2 pay cuts, Jack.
Your financial sacrifice
Yeah.
as an MLA and a cabinet minister.
Yes, Jack.
Struggling by on a big expense account and $60,000, $70,000 a year. Not easy for you, is it?
What are you talking about, Jack?
Your money
Oh, I see.
and all your free worldwide travel. Let's get down to business, Don. We both agree...
You shouldn't be criticizing us for not doing more free world travel, Jack. As a matter of fact, you know, instead of you yakking all the time about about cabinet ministers' travel, you should get out and find what other jurisdictions of the world are doing, and you should be giving us hell, Columbia, for not being aggressive enough.
I know what the coal producers in Australia are screaming. They're screaming at this $100 a ton price at Quintet, which Japanese want to bring down to $90. And they're trying to get that market away to give more trouble to Quintet, aren't they?
No, I don't think that's the situation. I think you're generalizing, Jack. The Quintet, the whole Northeast Coal Project was put together on the basis of the price of coal at that time. Since then, things have changed. I don't hear anybody yakking about the price of copper coming down, or the price of 2x4s, the price of beef, or other world commodities. It's just that you're trying to make a political football on a coal, and evidently you're doing a reasonably good job.
Mr. Phillips, I want to tell you something quite honestly. I want to see Northeast Coal be the biggest success in the world. But I want to put you, and I don't make a practice of knocking it, but let me put some simple concerns to you, and I want you to be able to answer them. The 56 banks behind Quintet, Quintet is in default. Let's not kid ourselves on that. Immense loans to Quintet, correct? Is that correct?
Jack, Quintet are having some startup problems, and that's between Quintet and the private sector.
Good.
You know, as I told the Japanese steel industry, it's usually the government that falls flat on its face in putting a project like this together. I'm glad that you haven't got me in front of your camera today saying that the tunnels and the railway cost 10 times as much as they were supposed to cost, and that's what you predicted. Or that the port cost more, or it wasn't finished on time, or the budget went way over.
No.
At least you haven't got me in front of your camera criticizing that. The government stood up to their responsibility. The tech mine is running very well, and Quintet have got some startup problems.
All
And
right.
it's great political fodder for you in the media to beat the hell out of Quintet and the Denison project because they've got some startup problems. But you seem to forget that when the Kaiser mine started up in the southeast, they had a lot of startup problems, and this is the biggest coal mine in the world. They've got some startup problems, which I'm sure they will solve.
If you'll just take a breath, I'll put to you
I'm taking a breath, Jack.
my modest fears about this giant project into which we, the people, federally and provincially, have got well over $1 billion. Now, my modest concern is this. The contracts were signed at $100 a ton, right? More or less. Tech has taken a $10 cut. It's increased the quantity, and over the long haul, Tech is going to be fine, thanks very much. But Tech by itself isn't enough to fill the orders. The Japanese want to cut the price of Northeast coal. Quintet are in severe financial trouble. Now, if they go belly up, who's going to own the mine? The banks are going to own the mine. Who's going to take it over? Can we meet the deliveries? I'm asking a sincerely honest question because I want to see it go like gangbusters.
Well, Jack, you're not asking me a sincerely honest question. It's a hypothetical question because you're saying if Quintet goes broke.
They're in default
and I don't
now.
happen to be the... that depends on how you look at it. You're trying to say, set a hypothetical situation and get into the minds of the people of this province and everywhere else that Quintet is going to go broke. I don't have any information that says Quintet's going to go broke. My gosh, if you look at the operation where the main investment is in the silos and the cleaning plant and all the rest of it, which is the bulk of the investment, it's running smooth. They've got some problems at the mine head, and I don't think anybody's going to go broke because you have to invest another small portion of money to keep a billion-dollar investment viable. It doesn't sound like common sense to me, but there's a lot of people that seem to want to thrash it to death. I think if you look at the situation, they have some startup problems at the mine head.
And there are problems, let's be honest, about the price of coal in the world market. We know that Southeast coal, which is in competition, is about $70 a ton, don't we?
Well, I know that the price of all commodities have come down in the last 3
Will
or
the
4
Japanese-
years, while the world has gone through a modest recession, Jack.
Will
the
the
price of everything has come down.
Oh, I agree. I'm every sympathy with you. We don't expect the provincial government to solve the world markets on coal, on lumber, or on copper, right?
Right.
You can't do it. But there are things you say that Quintet will be revitalized. They'll dig a new mine somewhere at the cost of a couple of $100 million and survive.
Oh, there you go, inflating again. Who has ever told you that it's going to cost $200 million, Jack? Any figure that I've read in the paper by anybody reasonable is about $50 million.
$50 million to establish the new...
And I'm not even sure it'll cost that because that's a private sector deal. But there again, you're inflating the situation.
All right, but you give
Yes,
me your assurances that you are convinced that this will, down the road, make money and not bankrupt anybody.
Well, Jack, look, the Japanese steel industry, or the Japanese companies are about 38% partners. Charbonneau de France is 12%. Denison Mines, a very, very successful Canadian company that operates in many other places in the world, for instance, Greece, Australia, Spain, and around the world, a Canadian company, are the shareholders in this, along with the international banking system. And they, my understanding is they have some startup problems, but I don't think anybody's going to walk away from this project, Jack.
Okay, next question. What are you going to do? Give me a hint, please, to try and relieve the burden of taxation, incredible as it is in the pulp industry, for instance, the famous Powell River caper, or in the mining industry, to give us some resurge of confidence which we require so badly in BC at the moment.
Jack, I thought you were a friend of mine.
I
and
am.
Here you're asking me to divulge what is in the budget. And you know that in our parliamentary system, if I divulge what is in the budget, I automatically have to resign as a cabinet minister and probably
Look,
get kicked
if
out as an
Hatfield-
MLA. I thought you were a friend of mine. And here you sit, bold-faced, asking me to tell you what's in the budget. Now, let me tell you this, my friend.
You can tell me that...
I'm enthused about what is in the budget, and I'm enthused about the economic package we're going to bring down, and I'm enthused about it, Jack, because we have our deficit under control. And had we not gone on the restraint program that we went through in the last 2 or 3 years, we wouldn't have our spending under control. For instance, let me tell you something, Jack. We're negotiating with Ottawa right now on a $650 million package under the ERDA agreement. You know, Ottawa hasn't got the money. We have our share of that money in the budget this year to ensure those programs are carried out. But had we not, Jack, gone on that restraint program, and had we not got our deficit under control, we would be in the same position as practically every other province in Canada, and indeed as Ottawa has been. Now, I want to tell you something else, Jack. We're not going out on make-work programs. The programs that will be brought in our economic package, and any tax measures which may or may not be made by the Minister of Finance after his traveling around the province last year and listening to the industry, will be long-term projects. This government has never gone on short make-work programs to try and solve the economy. And that's why, in the long run, we will be ahead of, in our economic planning of every other province in Canada and the envy of many jurisdictions in the United States.
Yeah, and we'll be doing something to reduce our appalling unemployment rate.
The answer is yes, Jack. I'm very enthusiastic, but you know that I can't tell you what's in the budget.
Oh, I expect. By the way,
But let me tell you something, Jack. Just in the last 6 weeks, more truly in the last 3 months, but in the last 6 weeks, there has been a change of attitude on behalf of the business community. And people are coming into my office, they're going into the British Columbia Development Office, they're going into my offices in Robson Square with starting to talk about projects that are years ahead. Now, that's a turnaround from what we've had in the last 3 years. So I'm heartened by the change in attitude. And I have to say, without being political, that I certainly think the change in attitude of the government in Ottawa, we'll hear the NDP yak about the economy, but since the Foreign Investment Review Act was changed, which they were all for, the NDP have always been for, against foreign investment, I should say. Since that act has been changed, there has been a major change in attitude of people who would like to come here to Canada and invest, in particularly in British Columbia.
Yeah, very good. I approve of that too. Just
Yes,
one.
so do I. Yes, I think it's a good move and certainly a change of attitude.
So do I.
Yes.
One final request to you. Will you please not set the cat among the pigeons this year by talking about union-free enterprise zones?
Well, Jack, you know, I guess I got caught coming off an airplane one time by, I think it was some cameras from your company asking me about special enterprise zones, and I was pretty upset at that time. I was also very tired, and I made a slip, I guess, and talked about, I talked about labor-free zones. Well, as you know and I know, it was a slip because there can be no such thing as a labor-free zone. We've got to have labor in these zones if they're going to work. But by the same token, why don't you give some of the critics of the special enterprise zones, tell them to smarten up and learn what's going on in the rest of the world, because they're being very critical, and they don't know what the devil they're talking about.
My thanks to Don Phillips.
Thank you, Jack. Nice talking to you.
And by
I'll
the
see
way,
you again sometime. Let me talk to you after the
Just a
budget
minute,
comes down.
just a minute. You don't have to worry about resigning if you say anything out of style nowadays. If Hatfield doesn't have to resign, nobody ever has to resign again.
Now, that's your comment, and you may have to live with it.
I'll live with it. Thanks, Don.
Bye-bye, Jack.
Next, Bob Williams of the NDP. I think it is, after the break. Bob Williams is back in the House again, from Vancouver East, his old riding. How many years, Bob, since you sat in the House and since you were a Minister of the Crown?
I guess about 9, Jack.
You created a good reputation as Minister of Lands and Forests, but what I want you to do this morning, hard-nosedly if you can, is tell me what you would do in this winter of our discontent to encourage people and try and get something moving in the very hard-hit British Columbia.
I guess well, yes, you know, the previous minister that you had on board said that it was a modest recession. The latest numbers we've got are 16% if we don't do the seasonally adjusted number. And then if you look at specific communities, we're up to 30 or 40%. We're talking about the worst time since the last Great Depression. And our traveling minister said it was a modest recession we have. So it's clear that major undertakings have to be made. I think what has to be done is getting out with the people of the province and working on local projects. It's clear that small-scale local projects are the way to go. Bob Skelly said yesterday that's what he wanted the House to do, to have a committee going out to the regions and embark on projects. The big one, of course, is forestry. If we were going to do a proper job of reforestation and silviculture in this province, it would almost take up all of the unemployed today.
Where would the money come from for that? I mean, to do a proper job in silviculture and reforestation would be a massive endeavor, would it not?
Yes, it would, but, you know, an agreement was signed with Ontario last fall for $150 million with the federal government. This is the province with half of the forests in Canada, and this is where the first agreement should take place. Instead, we've got agreements all across eastern Canada, nothing yet in British Columbia, where the need is greatest and where the economy and the trees are.
Well, let me try and be positive about this. If they got 150, and I presume Ontario put up another 150.
It's a sharing agreement, Jack, yes.
Total of 150, is it?
Yes, that's
So
right.
we therefore need a minimum program of what? $300 to $400 million on reforestation.
Yes, that's right. There are even some experts that say that we could be spending $500 million a year. But that would take up all of our unemployed if we tried to do that.
Who would do it, though?
But the spin-off benefits would be marvelous. You know, it would have an effect on the main street of every community in British Columbia. Small businesses would get cranked up again, and the economy would get moving. We saw yesterday in the legislature that these guys don't have a program. There was about half a dozen ministers got up and gave recycled speeches from a year ago. They haven't put it together.
I want to be quite specific in this, though. I mean, because obviously one thing that we can do, while it doesn't bring in any revenue at the moment, would bring revenue in the future is proper silviculture.
No, it works both ways. It brings in revenue now because of the push in the economy. It brings in revenue later when we harvest the wood. It works at both ends. And beyond that, it has a rate of return as an investment. And these guys have been embarking on projects so far, mainly in Greater Vancouver, not in the regions, that don't have a rate of return, like Expo and ALRT. They're not projects you make money on.
Yeah, but mind you, they are supplying jobs, and I'm not knocking
Oh, yes,
that.
that's right.
What I'm trying to get you to tell me is if we had a, say, $400 million reforestation program, how many people would that employ? Who would put up the money? I mean, would this be entirely government, or could the lumber companies, the forest companies get in on the act? Would we have to pay them to do maybe what they should have been doing in a better way all along?
Good question. I think we could have a balance between the feds and the province and the corporations, and that we could get the people back to work. I don't think that's out of the question at all.
So if they achieved that, if the province achieved that, we might get what? How many people buy it? What, 50,000?
I think we could talk even in terms of 100,000 if we were really serious about it.
Not at union rates, though.
Well, that's another question. You may be right. But at the same time, our problem is that these guys aren't interested in the gut things of this province anymore. They're interested in the exotic. They're interested in World's Fairs, they're interested in traveling, they're talking about high tech. What they've done is ignore our basic industry, and that's why we're in the shape we're in. We wouldn't have this level of unemployment if they didn't think of forestry as a sunset industry. Can you imagine Scandinavia saying, it's a sunset industry, we're phasing out forestry? They'd be going belly up like us.
Now, let's turn to two other things. Let's turn to BC Hydro, which by all accounts is in a pretty, not disastrous shape, but has suffered a lot of losses and a lot of bad planning.
Yes?
Does BC Hydro now just pull in its shell and sit there and merely service us with electricity and natural gas and attempt nothing new?
That's the big question, Jack. We've got a big pool of human capital there, some of the best engineering and dam people in the world. And they're being given their pink slip. What we should be looking at is exporting that talent in terms of making it available to the third world as consultants so that we keep the team together. And we should be looking, I think, more seriously at other alternatives. It's just that nobody's been running that ship for quite a long time. Mr. Bonner didn't run it, and the new people aren't either.
Now let's look at the tax levels. You know the screams there were about the new tax on water going over the dams, which they've held back a bit on this year.
Yeah.
You know the screams from Mac and Blow for, is it $14 million taxation, property tax at Pearl River, whereas in Alabama it would be $100,000. Can any government, with the load of the safety nets and the social system we have, cut back taxes to encourage industry in British Columbia, mining, forestry, pulp?
I think we have to look at some trade-offs, Jack, in terms of value added. The big push we need is to get more value added to our forest products. That has not happened in the last decade or so. And I'm willing to agree that there should be tax concessions to move into value added because the jobs and other downstream benefits are so great. That's what the Scandinavians do, that's what we've got to do.
Is our forestry...
But at the same time, you don't look at a holus bolus tax concession to them. You look at it with targets and goals in mind.
Well, being in the opposition, you can't give us any hope for an improvement this summer in the economy, can you, Bob Williams?
Well, we just shouldn't be in the shape we're in. Clearly, these people are going to use their PR game and say that restraint has been cut back and now we can do this. The point is that restraint caused a lot of the current problems. If they're having second thoughts, well, we'll be better off, but it'll be too little and too late. And it's clear, in addition, that they haven't pulled their act together. They're still working on the platform.
What image do you see for yourself, Bob, and you know the heat you took from the media in and out of power, do you see for yourself? Do you see for yourself as a reflection of the new sweet reasonableness of Bob Skelly in the House this session?
Well, I'm encouraged. We're all interested in rebuilding the economy and being positive, and I think Bob is working hard and getting out in the regions. I think he's got the right idea.
My thanks to Bob Williams, NDP MLA for Vancouver East. Extra 3,000 you're going to get.
Yeah, a little less than the other guys, Jack.
Okay, dokie, and you can get a parliamentary secretaryship because that's for the government. Next day,
so.
Frank Howard, the NDP whip. Thanks, Bob Williams. After the break.
Thanks, Jeff.
Frank Howard is the opposition House Leader for the NDP. You've been back how long in the House now, Frank?
Oh, since '79, Jack.
79.
Yep.
What do you think of the effect of these new House rules? Have you studied them or are you on the committee?
Oh, I was on the committee and helped draft them. I think you have to recognize, Jack, that under the system that we have here, government is all-powerful. Eh? Government is a dictator over the legislature. It decides the whole course of business, and you have to take that into account. There isn't much opportunity for private members to have any strong influence upon what government does or does not do. So the rules reflect that.
Before we get into that, do you think there is any need whatsoever for 10 extra parliamentary secretaries of the 12 backbenchers at $6,000 a year?
Well, I don't know about the numbers, Jack. I would think there's there's an obligation on the part of cabinet ministers, especially if they're going to be flying all over the world, as one of our predecessors on this program was doing, to have somebody in the House to represent them. I don't know whether 10 is the right number.
Oh, it seems to me quite ludicrous. It means that there'll only be 2 Social Credit elected members who won't get some extra lolly.
Well, the Premier's got to hold out a carrot of some nature to keep him in line.
And the only people I can think of who won't get are Jack Davis and Jack Kemp.
Well, You'll have to talk to the Premier about that.
Oh, you're not going to get into that one. Now, Austin Pelton, who seems a nice kind of guy, was saying that you will no longer be able to challenge a ruling of the Speaker. Does that sit well with you?
Fairly well, because, go back to what I said earlier, government is supreme over the legislature. I don't like that system, but it's there. And we've discovered that any time the ruling of the chair has been challenged, it's always been upheld by the government forces. They got the majority. Secondly, if we were going to proceed in the direction of having some reasonableness to the conduct of our affairs in the legislature, we need to remove as much as we can the Speaker from the element of partisanship. And every time his ruling was challenged, and on one occasion the government, this is many years ago, didn't like the ruling of the Speaker, I think it was Mr. Speaker Murray, who ruled in favor of the opposition. The government under W.A.C. Bennett challenged it and used their majority to overturn the Speaker. You know, they made him a kind of a partisan element. So we want to try to move the Speaker away from that position and make his position as Speaker more neutral, more the custodian of our authorities in the House than to be a kind of handmaiden to the government.
That, of course, that wouldn't have affected the Barrett scene of last year, would it?
Well, what would have affected that situation last year would be if we had somebody in the chair at the time that had a little bit of common sense. We didn't.
I don't want to grind our own axes, but I was kind of perturbed, perhaps in a petty way, when we were banned from the corridor where we normally interview cabinet ministers with the revolving doors. Was that raised at all in the committee?
Jack, I want to tell you something about that being banned from the corridors over here. The gallery didn't object to that. A few individuals did, but the gallery went along with it, muttered under their breath, but acquiesced in it all. And it's very difficult to have MLAs protect the public media, you know, from the influence of the Speaker when they don't want to stand up for themselves.
I retreat. What about any other changes in the rules that would affect the actual spirit of debate?
Well, I don't know the change in the rules are going to affect the spirit of debate, but the announcements in the last number of months by Bob Skelly, our new leader, that he's headed in the direction of cooperation, of working together, of trying to make this legislature serve the general public, that is what will influence the debate, not the rules. The rules are just kind of, you know, arid mechanisms that tell you what you can and can't do.
But I get the feeling that you're starting out on this continued session from last year with perhaps a better spirit of possible cooperation between all parties. Is that because of this incredible, as I keep saying, winter of our discontent and miseries?
No, I think that's primarily to the credit of Bob Skelly. Remember, he embarked upon this idea. He's the one that made many, many public announcements about it over the last 6 months. He's the one that wrote to the Premier and said, look, Mr. Premier, can you and I sit down and meet and talk about the orderly progress of business throughout the House? And he said that enough that has set a tone as to what we want to try to accomplish. And we're going to try to follow that.
Why didn't you make a decision on TV coverage of some kind in the House? That would be the best disciplinarian of all.
Jack, we did. We made the decision that television and radio broadcasting of the proceedings should be put in place. We were not able to go any further than that because, one, there has to be some examination made of what it will cost. What's the capital investment, you know, to put it in place? What's the operating cost per year? What would we have to do to the architecture of the building? Where would you locate the cameras and that sort of thing? That's technical stuff. That has to be looked at. And I think it would have been unwise for us to have gone full bore and said, do that tomorrow, without doing a little bit of planning beforehand and finding out what's involved.
Do you think the public will jump for joy at this recommendation that we get 12 extra MLAs in the House, which already holds 57 for 2.5 million people?
Do
you approve of that?
No, just a minute, Jack. Not necessarily, because that recommendation, you must remember, is founded upon the decision made in the Eckhart report. We go back to Gracie's finger.
Right.
And that was gerrymandering redistribution. Those boundaries have not been changed since that time. The anomalies and the incongruities and what Eckhart did and what this government imposed upon the province of British Columbia through redistribution are still there. All this does is add additional members to certain ridings based upon their population. What we need to embark upon, we have always argued, is an independent commission, redistribution commission, that's going to look at population shifts, and if you have to change the riding boundaries, you change them to accommodate, the population demand. It may not come out at more than 60, or who knows, but you need that independent commission. That's consistently been our stance. So this, what we have now is just sort of founded upon a brutalizing gerrymandering that took place under Eckhart's recommendations a number of years ago. It hasn't been changed.
My thanks to Frank Howard, and I trust the sweet reasonableness will continue at least for a couple of days.
It always has with me, Jack. Thank you.
I'll be back with Graham Lea, leader of the United Party. Up the United Party. UP, United Party, after the break. I think the phrase is a cloud no bigger than a man's hand. And Graham Lea, former NDP MLA, has set himself a tough uphill task, the United Party. Do you get any special allowances now that, although you're still one man, you're a party leader, Graham?
No, under the Constitution, there has to be 4 members in a political party with seats in the House before you get any special allowance.
I'm sure that's not your concern at the moment. What are you going to do as a single voice, disassociated from your old friends in the NDP in this session? How can you survive effectively?
Well, I think I can survive effectively by being a bit more truthful than the other 2 parties about what's going on in the economy, for one thing. I've sat and viewed your program this morning and listened to the other 2 parties talk about applying their 2 kind of theories to the economy. And I look at both of them and I say, well, they're different, but they're still trying to apply the theories that they had in the 60s and in the 50s to a rapidly changing economy. If we're going to be able to compete in the international marketplace, it means that we're going to have to consider the reality of the impact of high technology to bring around higher productivity in our resource and industrial sector. That means that we're going to, if we're successful in raising productivity through new technology, that we're going to have to take a look at putting people out of work. You can't, on the one hand, raise productivity by putting in more modern machinery and expect not to put people out of work. So in the short term, we have a moral question that we have to face. We have to face the redistribution of wealth in a changing economy. We have to take a look at the redistribution of work and work sharing in a changing economy. And we're going to have to take a look at the redistribution of power and the decision-making process in a changing economy. You know, what's happening is that the old system is that when there's a tough time in a certain sector of the economy, they lay off the people with no seniority, and the people with seniority continue to work and live pretty much the way they did in the past. And that is not going to work as we go into the new future and the new economy.
But how does any government change that? We're also set and static, and we have systems, and as you say, seniority. We have public sector jobs where the company can't go broke because it's the people, it's the government. And we are creating new classes of established, reasonably well off, and the new poor. How do we change it?
Well, it means that we're going to have to take a look at some of the values that we've held in the past and some of the attitudes we've held in the past and start changing. I don't expect that there's going to be a revolution in British Columbia. What I think, though, is that there has to be a revolution in the individual minds of British Columbians and Canadians.
Are you suggesting self-sacrifice?
Yes. What I'm saying is that we're going to have to share the economy that's there. That means, well, let's take the transit dispute that went on last year.
Right.
What they did is they said, okay, you people, there's less money, so we're going to have to cut back. So instead of saying, let's share the discomfort of a downturned amount of revenue, they said, let's lay off the people at the bottom, and let's make sure that those people with seniority pretty much live the way they have in the past. And that's not going to be good enough as we go into our new economy. And a new economy we must go into if we're going to survive.
What you say makes common sense, but in our system it's so clumsy. What would you do? You've got a dispute involving, we'll say, 10,000 workers, right? And you're going to lay off 1,000 workers. Instead of laying them off, you say that through sweet reason, must be shared between 10,000 workers instead of held by 9.
Well, I don't think anybody can sit down, Jack, and tell you that they have all the answers. I think rather we have to look at a process of bringing British Columbians together and sitting. First of all, we have to admit we have the problem.
Right.
It's not good enough just to sit down and say, well, elect us and everything will be all right. It's the same as the individual growth in a human being. Before you can deal with some of the problems that we have as individuals, we first of all have to admit we have them before we can deal with them. Take the forest industry. A very liberal figure would be that we have 40 years left of forestry if we cut at the annual allowable cut we're cutting at now. That's a reality. The fishing industry is in worse shape. The mining industry is flat on its back. And it's not going to be good enough any longer for government to sit behind closed doors with their bureaucracies, then come out and say, we have a program that's going to fix everything.
But to put the mining industry on its feet, if it were possible, you've got to slash taxes, slash government income, slash services to people to get competition back.
That's a bit of a red herring, Jack. Let's take copper mining, for instance. We have new competition coming on stream from places like Zaire and Chile, who are selling their product into the international marketplace at oftentimes below their own production costs, just to meet their payments to financiers throughout the world and their balance of payments.
Right.
On the other hand, the uses for copper are also going down because of new technological advances like fiber optics and a host of others. So if we can't produce and sell copper competitively into the international marketplace, what we should be doing is gearing up our education and research system so that possibly we can sell technology and mining and smelting systems to Zaire and Chile. It means that we have to re-examine our economy honestly and say, where are we going to go?
Can it be done in a democracy, or does it need arbitrary direction from the top?
I think it's going to have to be done with more of a democracy. We have global problems. Jack, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? As a matter of fact, we may have lost the feed, but we'll just leave it at that and tell Mr. Lea that our time is up anyway. I wish him well. The new leader of the United Party, Graham Lea in Victoria, a lone voice for his views in the legislature. And I'll be back with Peter Hamilton of Lifeforce after the break. I'd like you to meet Peter Hamilton, who is founder of and director of an organization called Lifeforce, which I first became intrigued with because of his protests about vivisection, medical experimentation on animals, a subject over which I have very little sympathy with him, except for the fact that one doesn't want to see any unnecessary cruelty done to animals used for medical experimentation. Would we agree on that?
Yes.
To a
Yes,
point.
so we would. There is a lot of suffering that can be stopped while we bring in a safer, more humane health research system.
But I want people to know a little bit about you. You're the man, it says in the clipping here, way back in '82, who forced the PNE to stop using mice to bet on which door the little mouse would escape out of, right?
Yes, they had a gambling game out at the PNE called Oscar the Mouse, where a mouse was put in a box and shook up, and people would bet on what color hole the mouse would run down. We felt that this wasn't necessary, that people could gamble in other ways. So we showed the PNE that a lot of people were concerned, and in 2 days we gathered about 200 names on a petition, and it was stopped.
I would have signed a petition for that. That's a piece of unnecessary, cruel nonsense to a poor wee mouse.
Well, it showed me how people made money on abusing animals. The mice were even imported from a friend of the PNE's back east. They would ship the mice out. So
at that time, you were a commercial artist, quite successful.
yes, I was involved with artwork and my music and social issues.
And furthermore, you're the guy who went out in his canoe and braved the shotguns of duck hunters somewhere out near Richmond's Battle of the Bogs, correct?
Yes, we feel that hunting is killing and it shouldn't be classified as a sport. The other problem out in Richmond was this was a area where there was other recreational activity, and the area was closed down to hunting because City Council felt that it was incompatible with the other recreational activity.
But you were charged and convicted for obstructing the hunters.
I was charged, and we will be appealing that charge.
You were convicted. You were found guilty of something.
Yes, interfering with hunting, and we feel that it's our constitutional right to protest against killing of wildlife.
How far does how many members do you have in Lifeforce?
Well, we have about 500. We don't really concentrate on memberships. If people hear about what we are doing, and if they want to support us, then they can join. We don't want to bother people by
How far do
join
you
us.
go in your attitude of sanctity towards all life? If I kill that fly there right now, would you get mad at me?
Well, it wouldn't be necessary to kill that fly. Like, you could just say go away.
No, that fly is dripping its filthy disease urine on my food if it's there. I want to kill that fly.
Well, I think it's more a matter of respecting life. Flies and wildlife and,
Yeah, I mean, you
and
don't
other
go to the extent
species.
of respecting insect life.
Well, I think they have their place in the ecosystem, and I think we should respect their position in the ecosystem.
You are, I presume, and you must answer this yes to this question. Are you, Peter Hamilton of Lifeforce, a dyed-in-the-wool total vegetarian?
Yes, yes, and working to be a vegan, phasing out dairy products.
Working to be a what?
A vegan.
What is a vegan?
That is when you do not eat any animal products, dairy products either, because
Because it
dairy,
comes from a live animal.
Yes, and the dairy industry, the cows that are kept pregnant to give humans milk, the dairy calves are used for veal production, and it's very inhumane the way those calves are used.
Veal production, slink veal.
Yeah, they're kept in a crate-like environment for their entire lives and fed a iron-deficient diet, and it's very cruel.
Well, I'm pretty much a vegetarian myself nowadays, but I'll never be a vegan. I can't live without my milk.
Well, I think the human animal is the only species that continues to drink milk after we've been weaned. It's not really necessary. But there's soya milk and other alternatives.
Now, about animal testing. Is animal testing your particular target? Animal experimentation?
We are very involved in the issue of using animals in research. We are totally opposed to using animals in the military testing of weapons, psychology tests on animals, and cosmetic testing on animals.
But
when it comes to medical research, we feel that there is a lot of suffering that can be stopped while we work on developing a safer, more humane
But
health
you would much rather see a bypass transplant in a heart experimented on a pig than you would, I presume, on me.
Well, when one understands the research system involves the in vitro, the non-animal studies, the in vivo, the animal studies, and the human clinical and the human epidemiological studies. Very little can be solely credited to animal experimentation. And it's these several tests.
I know,
the
the
whole-
final
the whole
analysis,
system.
that artificial heart, if I wanted one, which I don't think I would, has got to be tested on animals before it's put into me.
Well,
Must be.
Well, the test is always on humans. Even though there are animal tests done previously, it becomes the human experiment as soon as it's
I'm totally against
carried through.
unnecessary cruelty, but I'd hate to see animal medical experimentation wiped out if it's properly done, merely because of what seems to be a rush of sentiment on your part.
Yes, because we are concerned with human and animal problems, there may be some gray areas, but there is certainly a lot of abuse with animals being used in research.
Some of the people in the animal protection leagues are really quite violent. You're not one of them. You're not associated with these people.
No, we don't support any violent action. such as the actions that are done by the Animal Liberation Front. We do understand one of their action of going into research facilities to try to rescue animals to stop the suffering. We understand it. We do not condone it. We only understand it. We don't think that that is going to change the system.
Well, you're certainly a different kind of interview for me, Peter Hamilton, founder and director of Lifeforce, and I want to find out how many sympathizers and friends you have out there in television land. So if you want to talk to Peter, founder, director of Lifeforce, call him immediately after the break. If we were all vegetarians, Peter, the world would be overrun with chickens, for instance. You don't eat an egg, do you?
Well,
Boiled egg. You wouldn't have a boiled egg.
well, that's phasing out and working towards being a vegan.
A vegan.
I think it's not logical just to bring animals into the world to kill them, to eat them.
Well, we'd be starving to death if we didn't breed them for food.
No, there's alternative diets that are a lot healthier.
Grass?
No, vegetables, nuts, and fruits. The National Institute of Health and the National Academy of Science in the United States, they recommend that one lowers one intake of cholesterol in order to prevent heart disease and certain types of cancer.
I'm a living example of reduction in cholesterol, but I still enjoy a nice steak now and again. Go ahead to Peter Hamilton of Lifeforce.
Peter, my boy.
Yeah.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Seems to me some people are trying to talk to different animal species, like the whale, for instance, electronically. Could you tell us whether you talk to animals? Is this some kind of a religion? Do you put animals on a same basis as humans? Do you have a belief in God, or how do you feel about these things?
I think that we should respect all life because each species has their role to play in our ecosystem.
But you don't talk to animals? No. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I certainly know how this gentleman feels, but I think animals are so cruel to each other. You know, I suppose we could be more humane. And it's very sad to think of what we do to animals in the laboratory, but nature is cruel.
Hear, hear. Raccoons eat my chickens without let or hindrance unless I'm on the bed.
We certainly can be more compassionate and less violent. What other animals do, that's up to them. We're supposed to be intelligent creatures, and we have found less violent alternatives.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Yeah, I'd like to say, as far as life goes, I do agree with you as far as animals and that shouldn't be tortured and anyway, and I think that society itself has, I don't know, man has just tried to ruin the earth and the animals on the earth, and that goes for man itself. He should be more loving and caring and think before he does things.
Thank you. You found a friend. Go ahead, please.
Hello, my name is Gina Tartini, and I am a member of Lifeforce. I'm just really happy to see Peter on the Webster show today, getting some actual coverage because he is a very hard-working person, and he's done very well with this Lifeforce.
And we're going to put up an address for people who want to join Lifeforce.
Pardon me?
We're going to put up the address, too.
Okay, that's great because I'm a really caring citizen for animals, and there just isn't enough people in society who really care about animals. And
Okay, thank you. Box 3117, Main Post Office, Vancouver, V6B 3X6. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Gentlemen, one of the comments that I'd like to make is that I'm somewhat opposed to testing on animals, but not because in many cases it's helpful and humanity gains from it. But what I'm really opposed to is the testing on animals is that it's used to manipulate what's learned is used to manipulate the people rather than to help them more than anything.
What do you mean?
Well, they'll perform certain experiments to see how the animal behaves, and then they'll say, okay, now we can do that with a human. We can force him to do this. We can lean him in this direction. We can do this and that with them. Don't you think so?
Yes, psychology research involves understanding the mind, but the military has used it for controlling the mind, and they've done some very horrible research, such as the research back in Montreal.
On humans?
Yeah, on humans.
They did it on humans. They can't do that on animals, can they?
Well, they have been doing it with humans, and we're also concerned with the experiments on humans.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello. Yes, I really feel that religion is at fault in the beginning for our attitude toward animals. I've been studying the Bible for the last 6 months with this one view in mind of animals and our attitude toward them. And what I've found from studying the Greek text and the way that it's been translated in most Bibles is that they've taken away, they teach us that animals have no soul, they have no spirit, they're going down, their spirit goes down to the earth and is destroyed at the end of their life, that they don't have, that we have much preeminence above them and we're much more value. But what I found is many scriptures in the Bible where it actually, and I'm not religious at all, but many scriptures in the Bible where it actually says that what else is holy but the life of a living being, and that he has made a plan to unite all things in him.
Okay, ma'am, but she's obviously on the reincarnation kick.
Yeah, different Bibles can be interpreted in different ways. I think it's interesting that one of the commandments is thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say humans and or animals. It just says thou shalt not kill.
Never thought of that before. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning, ma'am. You've got 30 seconds.
I agree with Mr. Hamilton. I feel that violence breeds violence, and I think it's very unchristian to be cruel to animals. We should treat them as our fellow creatures on this planet. We're all part of the system. And I'd like Mr. Hamilton to tell us about some of the research.
We haven't got time now, ma'am, but Mr. Hamilton has been a pleasant guest this morning. I don't agree with you all the way, but obviously you're a decent fellow. My thanks to Peter Hamilton of Lifeforce, Box 3117, Main Post Office, Vancouver, and I'll be back after the break. John Turner tomorrow, Liberal fellow, 9 a.m. precisely. More monies for your MLA on check at midnight. Liberal leader John Turner at 9 a.m. precisely. Tomorrow on Webster, we'll find out from John